I'm gonna bring Wobby in actually right away here.
Oh,
Wobby, what's going on?
Hey, nothing,
going on,
fellas. How you
man?
doing? Sorry for
Good.
being late.
Oh, you're
Not a
good. You're
problem.
good.
I forgive you.
Yeah.
That was your
No,
easy
you're
day.
fine.
Yeah, I know.
You're fine. I mean, I had a show last night that someone did, and my co-host totally forgot about it, and he had Stringer, I didn't, so we didn't even have the show. So believe me, you're fine. I'm
Yeah,
glad
well,
you showed up, man.
Thank
Yeah,
you. What
yeah,
you guys
for sure.
talking about?
Well, first off, let's backtrack.
Pro
here,
Bowl
'cause
came out.
Yeah, Pro Bowl
Yeah,
Pro Bowl rosters came out. But before we do any of that, though, let's get back to what happened on last Saturday. What was your emotion? What were your emotions like throughout that game?
I was kind of in awe or shocked, I think, in the first half because I didn't have a high opinion of the Colts coming into the game, and I'm not rooting against them, and I like outside the box thinking, and I don't think everything always has to go the conventional way, but the whole Jeff Saturday, like firing Frank Reich, Jeff
Right.
Saturday thing was very strange. So, I didn't have a high opinion of the team. And so to see that happen in the first half, I was just shocked, and it didn't feel legitimate to me. I mean, it's not that I didn't believe it, but I thought it was a 33-0 lead that was a house of cards. And I
Right.
knew it would collapse, but I didn't know if it would collapse all the way to a Vikings tie or victory. And then I think once we got midway through the third quarter, it was pretty clear to me that there's a pretty good shot here at the Vikings. I was at a family event, so I couldn't really like hack my phone and hit refresh and see what the in-game odds were on the Vikings throughout the course of that second half. But it would have intrigued me because I had a pretty good sense that it was going to be a close game at the end, because I never thought the Colts really were playing well enough to have that big of a lead. And I don't mean to take anything away from the Vikings comeback, but I do think it was as much of a collapse as it was a comeback.
Yeah, I kind of feel that same way. And once we got it down to a 2-score game early in the fourth quarter there, that's when I had that feeling. I'm like, okay, this feels more normal. The third quarter when we're really just trying to fight our way back. Like, I'm just like, God, it's just, I don't know. We'll see. It was fun, at least fun to watch them take a shot at it. But yeah, when they got it down to, 15 points going early in the fourth quarter, that's when I'm just like, all right, it's game time now. Totally different ball game, because this is what this team is used to.
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of the same thing. Like the Colts, I felt the same way, shocked, especially after Jonathan Taylor went down. They lost their best offensive player, and they build that lead, and you're just like, I just don't understand how this is happening. And obviously, you really can't blame the defense too much, because the offense and special teams put them in pretty bad spots a lot of times. Yeah. And it was nice to see finally a little bit of change in, finally we changed some things up, finally got a little bit of pressure on Matt Ryan. So yeah, one thing you can say about this Minnesota Vikings team is they are not boring, and it makes for amazing television.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think if you're a Colts fan, you probably didn't think he had a shot anyway.
Mm-hmm.
At the season, but so maybe you didn't take it as hard as you maybe would have if it was earlier in the season.
Mm-hmm.
But to lose that game is embarrassing.
Yeah.
And if you were competitive and trying to get into the playoffs, you'd be sick about that.
Dude.
And for that to happen to Matt Ryan and to Jeff Saturday, who are probably great guys, I've never met them, so I want to be measured in my criticism of them personally. Right. But for that to happen to you is big indictment on your ability in each of your jobs.
Yeah.
Because that's an all-time embarrassment for
history
for a team.
Yeah, one of the things I heard about the history of this comeback game, and it's just me repeating it, was, it's Frank Reich, who was the quarterback that led him back, Bills against the Oilers. Yeah. And now obviously the Oilers were a better team than the Colts, but I think there was 33 unanswered points in that game, and we were down 33-0. Yeah. And so in that game there was 33 unanswered points. Frank Reich led him back. Frank Reich gets fired, and then sure enough, it's almost like the curse of Frank Reich on the Colts to have them blow a 33-point lead. So it's almost like unbelievable. You could not write that story That's the thing I was going into the game that I was maybe, if anything, worried about is that they were coming off a bye. And all of a sudden we decide, okay, well, your guys are going to play on Saturday now. So you were playing on Saturday a day earlier, while those guys got 2 weeks to prepare. So that was my only worry. I still thought we were going to win by 2 touchdowns. And after this game, I'm thinking we should have won this game by 4 touchdowns, because that's how good I think we were compared to them, because we were able to do that. And like you said, everything in that first half was like a house of cards. And we talked about the defense a little bit there. They legitimately only gave up 16 points because we went for 4th down on our own like 30, 35-yard line twice and didn't make it, and they kicked field goals. So legitimately the defense only gave up 16 points. And I think and I want your viewpoint on this, I think I heard a little bit in your show yesterday, but they did a little thing, and they did some things different, I thought, in this game. I think they did come after the quarterback a little bit, and they did disguise coverages. The corners, the safety, they were a little more aggressive, I think, and that's what they said they were going to do, and I think they did it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they used more people.
Yeah, I heard that in your show. Yeah,
and so what impact that had on the Colts, only they know for sure. But I'd have to think it was an advantage for the Vikings. DJ Wanham played a lot more than he normally does. And then the other thing too is, I didn't want to get too loud about this in the last episode of the Wobcast, but it's like, Ed Donatel maybe made some adjustments, because Kevin O'Connell, as much as he defended Ed Donatel and said we're not going to move on from him, fire him, I do think he put some pressure publicly and probably privately to make some changes.
Right.
Subtly, privately he did it, and subtly, publicly he did it, and privately it was probably less subtle. So I'm sure Coach Donatel made some changes. With that being said, the players played better. I mean, Duke Shelley had probably his best game of the season.
Yeah,
of career.
I didn't know he could tackle, and you found that out.
Yeah, Zadarius
PFF 86 or something.
Yeah, I think he was the 2nd graded corner in the league last week, or something.
4th, I think he's 4th or something. 4th, I saw. I actually took a screenshot of your guys' stats.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad you did. So, I mean, the players played better. Zadarius Smith looked like he was good. Daniil Hunter was, I don't want to call him a game wrecker, but I think he made some impact plays. And to me, Harrison Phillips had one of his better games as well. So, the players played better. And when the players play better, the scheme looks better, even if the scheme is the same from week to week. So, I think that game against the Colts was encouraging for the defense, and I think the game against the Jets was very encouraging for the defense. The Lions' performance left some to be desired, but over the last 3 weeks, guys, the Vikings defense is 33% in the red zone. So, they're the bend but don't break thing is, we can laugh and joke about it, but in a lot of games this season, it's kind of been true. They give up a lot of yards, but then you get into the red zone and you don't score.
Well, they didn't need to get in the red zone with the Lions because they were bombing it from 50 yards out. But that was probably the only game that was like an anomaly in that stat years. But I agree. They were keeping people out of the end zone.
And I also want the Vikings offense to take a lesson from the Jets game and the Colts game, because the Jets and the Colts both were relegated to kicking a lot of field goals. And like, that can feel good to you because you're like padding your lead sometimes. But like, the team that kicks the most field goals is probably losing the game more times than not. I mean, you need touchdowns. And it's one thing if you can salvage a scoring drive with a 45-yard field goal, but if you're kicking field goals from inside the red zone, you're going to lose the game. And I think the Vikings offense needs to remember that and needs to stay aggressive and be true to themselves and trust themselves coming down the stretch here and in the playoffs when they get into a 4th and 2 or they get inside the red area or in a goal to go situation. Don't be afraid to punch that in. Put pressure on the other defense to guard your playmakers for 4 downs.
Yeah, I think it holds up true when we kicked 5 field goals against Seattle in the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's no good, so how cold was that game, by the way?
I just got done thawing out from it the other day. So,
that was bad.
I still can't get over Bud Grant and his short sleeves going out for And I actually brought that up to Chuck Foreman when we were talking. He says, "Yeah, man, that was him." I was at that game. I saw him. I thought he was crazy.
Yeah, that was cold. That was an all-timer for sure. That was Sub-Zero. That was
yep. That one hurt especially if you were there, just because you're just, I don't know, you're so cold. I was in the
threw
stands.
my hat across the bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, it was. And then, everybody's cold, just ready to be fired up, about to win the game. And it was just that slow walk, disappointing. Oh yeah, back to your car. It was just rough.
It was also tough because of who the opponent was. It was a very well-respected, talented,
big win,
in the middle of their prime Seahawks team.
Right.
That was dominant, and went to 2 Super Bowls, and like you had them not on the ropes. I mean, you had them beat.
Right. Kick field goal.
Yeah, and in those elements and in that building, and it being early on in Zim's tenure, and just that was a tough one to take.
For sure. So let's look a little bit forward here. So obviously, like we could talk about the Giants game, but I'm looking at the Giants game as step one. As of right now, I mean, with the Jalen Hurts injury, there might be there's a small chance maybe they lose out, we win out, get that 1 seed. But I'm more looking, the most important thing to me is securing that number 2 overall seed, I think. Just because, I mean, I'd hate to like end up in a scenario where we got to go play at San Francisco in order to get into Philadelphia. That scares me a little bit. So like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think it's super important for the Vikings to make sure they maintain that number 2 seed?
Yeah, I do. I think it's important for every team, but I think the Vikings, you know what though, Casey, for me, it's as much like not wanting to go and play on the road because those are tough environments.
Exactly.
But it's also like, because the Vikings environment is freaking impossible for other teams to come into. When that building is tuned up and raring, I mean, it's hard to hear in there.
Yeah.
And so I think the Vikings have a distinct advantage when they're at home. Every team has an advantage when they're at home, but there are degrees of advantages that teams have. The Vikings are on the upper end, if not number one of the 2 or 3 best, along with Kansas City, New Orleans, Seattle when they were really good.
Right.
Green Bay is a historic place and is almost like a religious place for a football person to go. But from a home field advantage and a noise standpoint, it doesn't hold a candle to US Bank Stadium. So that place is small and loud, and the Vikings want to play there in the playoffs. And honestly, I think Cousins plays better in that building than he does outside. So I do think it's important, Casey. When I look at the possible opponents, and we power rank the 5 possible playoff opponents on the last episode of the Wobcast, to me, I think you want Seattle. I think that's, if I could choose a team, that's who I'd choose. And after that, it'd be Washington. And I think that's neck and neck, like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You want one of those 2. Beyond that, I think you're getting close to toss-ups with the Giants, Lions, and Packers. And I think if you look at the balance of the Packers season to date, you wouldn't be scared of them. But if you consider where the Packers would be if they had made the playoffs, that means they had won 4 straight games, including having defeated you in the second to last game of the season. True. And then they won a win-and-in game against the Lions in the last game of the season. And you do not want that scenario unfolding and then having Aaron Rodgers come into your building in the first round of the playoffs. He lives for that moment. Yeah. He wants that moment. So they would be last on those power rankings. Green Bay would be last. I think you want Seattle.
For sure. I really hope, I mean, I would love it if the Vikings could go into Lambeau and just destroy the Packers' hopes.
I mean, it would be sweet if we ended up winning that game, but we've played Aaron Rodgers in that Packer team too many times. Yeah. And it's like that. If we lose, that would be the worst case scenario of the entire season, is to lose to the Packers in playoffs, especially the season we've had this year. But obviously going in there and beating them would be a huge positive. Right. But I'd rather just not take my chances, I think.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. You know what, though? To a lesser degree, I felt this way, guys, when we opened US Bank Stadium. The Packers were the first opponent, and I'm like, really? I'm like, we'll let these guys come in here and beat us in the first game of the building, and it ended up going the right way. But Yeah, and I think, Casey, what you're saying is you'd love on the second to last game of the season to go into Green Bay and just throttle them and end it. Like have them have them upset Miami, because if you look at the slate of games this week, guys, it's got a good chance to go Green Bay's way. If they upset Miami, I think Seattle will lose at Kansas City. And that's a team that, and I think the Giants are going to lose at Minnesota, and I think Washington's going to lose at San Francisco. So this is stacking up this week to look good for Green Bay a week from now. And so, and so at that point, you'd have a chance to go in there and end it, and that would be kind of a cool moment. And it's not a meaningless game for the Vikings because they're probably playing for seed, for the 2 seeds. So it'd be interesting to see how all that plays out. Fun scoreboard watching this time of year for teams who are in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I almost think Detroit's in. Because they had, like, when I looked at their schedule, they had the easiest schedule going into the playoff as far as wins, like strength of schedule.
And then you mentioned, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead. I think you're probably right about that, Dave, but it's still Detroit, man. Like, let's see it happen. Like, I can see him losing at Carolina. So,
yeah.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, for some reason, I have a guy that's a Carolina fan, and he is like, God, we have to. Now we're like barely getting the playoffs. We're gonna be drafting high, and we gave away our best player, and he's just like, this is a miserable season. Yeah. And he's talking about possibly making the playoffs. Yeah. So it's almost like I don't want to make the playoffs if I'm 6 and 10. What is it going to be? 7 and 9, something like that if they make it.
But it's easier though when you have a Rams pick that's going to be a top 5.
Right. True, they lucked out so. The Lions lucked out so big, and with the Rams losing
Seahawks,
so bad.
The Seahawks in Denver too. They got
I think
number 2 pick
like
right now.
4 or 5 of the top 10 right now that were given by trades or something. I thought there was something like that in the top 10 where it's something kind of crazy like that.
Yeah, you might be right about that. That would
Lions
make sense.
set themselves up pretty good. Trading.
Yeah, but it sounds like they're actually going to stick with Goff over there now. I mean, at least that's what they're saying right now. Give him an extension, which he's been playing well enough. Kind of one of those guys that's you think of him as a bridge guy, but he was a number 1 overall pick. So there's talent there.
And has been to the Super Bowl.
Offensive line does wonders to a quarterback.
Is really good over there. Let's get back to some Vikings conversation here. Wobby, you mentioned the atmosphere in the stadium, and you mentioned the Giants. I want to put those 2 things together. We got the Giants coming up Christmas Eve on Saturday. Here in Minnesota, got some snowfall rolling in. I think the whiteout thing is a super cool idea for this upcoming game. For some reason, I just think that's going to just bring the fans' energy up a little more. I really hope everybody follows along and wears white to the game. I think I don't know. It looks cool in all like the images that they're showing. I just think that makes for a really cool atmosphere.
My guess is they'll have white T-shirts on the seats.
Probably. It's unique. It's new for Vikings fans to want to wear white, to be told to wear white in their own building. It will be cool. The fans will engage in it, and the programming, the folks who run the show at US Bank Stadium are elite at their jobs. I worked with them for 15 years. They do a fantastic job. They totally get it. Not every building does. The organization invests capital, money, resources into those people. So it's going to be spectacular in that building. And it's going to be a buzzsaw for the New York Giants. The only thing that the Giants have to their favor that will help them mitigate that is, I think their bread and butter is the ground game with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, which, when you're dealing with noise problems, it's a little bit easier to deal with that when you're trying to get off the ball in the run game as opposed to when you're in pass sets. So that's going to help them. However, if they get behind early in the game or even late in the game and they have to throw it a bunch, they're cooked. I foresee an angle of victory for the Giants would be Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, yin and yang, zone reads, and Jones is reading it right, and he's tucking and running when they commit to Barkley, and when they try and commit to Jones, he's giving it to Barkley, and that could be a headache. That's hard to deal with, and then if you could pull it in and not run it yourself and not give it to Barkley and throw a pop pass to a tight end or throw a quick slant every now and then to keep the safeties honest. I mean, that's what the Eagles did to the Vikings in the 2017 NFC Championship game. So that's what the Vikings have to look out for. Save that, though, I don't really see this game being that competitive. later on once they get going. I think early on, that Giants defensive front is going to cause some problems for the Vikings, but Kevin O'Connell will find some adjustments and will be able to pull away eventually, as long as the Vikings can contain Jones and Barkley on the ground. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And you mentioned like the game day crew at US Bank Stadium, like even like regular games when they do like the intro video and how they bring the players onto the field and do the introductions. Like I get goosebumps every time I go there. I make sure I do not miss that. I'm up in the stands when all that starts, because just it's all just such a great experience, and I can't wait to see what they're gonna do with this whiteout game. Yeah. I wish I was gonna be there. That'd be a really cool cool atmosphere. It always, I mean, US Bank always is, but just that little extra.
Yep, you're totally right, Casey, and I'm glad you go in and watch that early on. And when I was there, I would always encourage my family to get there early to do that. And I know people love to tailgate and get in there at the last second, and I now do that myself, and I get that part of it. But for anyone who gets to go to other stadiums and to take in the experience, you might get a loud stadium, you might get a team that plays really well, but the programming, pregame, in-game, is just not there in other buildings, and it helps generate noise and atmosphere and environment that can be a distraction to the adversary. And I do not want to overstate the importance of them and go take it too far, but it's not zero. It's greater than zero. The effect that they can have on the game and generating momentum and noise in the building, which helps the home team.
So you go into a lot of PFF grades and stuff, and I did see that the Giants have, according to PFF, the worst grade in coverage, defensive coverage. So do you think, like, what's your key to this game for the Vikings? You said the key of how the Giants might win. Do you think the key for the Vikings, and they're also pretty low, I think they're like 46.6 coverage defense, but also like 46.3 run defense. So do you think this is just going to be a huge offensive game from us? And especially after like that huge offensive performance we had second half of last game. I mean, if we can bring some of that momentum into this one early, hopefully, we don't see that a lot unless we're behind, but it could be the game.
So what I think, Jamie, and that's a good question, is what I really loved in the second half was the utilization of Dalvin Cook, not just as a runner, but in shifts and motions, lined up as a receiver in the screen game. The Vikings have a hard time run blocking, and if you have a hard time run blocking in general, you're going to have a hell of a hard time run blocking against the Giants with their front. And we all watched Kayvon Thibodeau and the impact he had on the Commanders last week. So, so to me, what you need to do is overwhelm their coverage, because you're right, Jamie, they are poor in coverage, whether you're going by a PFF grade or the eye test, they're awful. Yeah. And so the way that they can beat you on defense is by being aggressive and opportunistic, a lot like how the Packers always had to beat you on defense when they had Favre and Rodgers. They didn't have great defenses, but they were opportunistic because they always had big leads and they were jumping routes and taking chances and zero blitzing because they knew they got 12 back there to bail them out and score 30 points a game. That's what the Giants have to do to beat you. So I think you need to overwhelm them. I think you need to send 4 guys out on most routes. Maybe you got to have a guy in there for protection every now and then, but quick passing and let your talented receivers out talent the talentless secondary that the Giants have. And I don't mean to disparage them too much and go over the top, but they are struggling on defense and in pass coverage. And I think you'd be remiss to not just keep going back to that until they show you that they can cover. Until they show you that, you make them cover and you beat them that way. And no one's been able to stop Jefferson. I don't know how the Giants are going to be the first team to do it.
No, and with KJ Osborne stepping up from last game, if he can continue doing that, man, I feel like that's what we're missing on offense, is just a second receiver that can, like, we went and got TJ Hawkinson, but we haven't had a really true wide receiver 2 yet this year. Obviously we were hoping Adam Thielen would be that again, which he's been there here and there. And then KJ Osborne just hasn't really lived up to the expectations that, like, me and Casey had. We thought he was going to kind of even pass him Thielen up, but we finally saw last game what KJ Osborne can do. And man, if we can keep that momentum for him going forward, I think that could make just the world of difference for our entire offense. Like, I don't know if you have to call plays for him or what you do, especially when he gets that ball in his hands. I mean, he's a strong runner, and he's always pushing like 5 yards, and
he's got attitude. Yeah, he's got attitude for sure. Yeah, and yeah, you can call plays for him. I don't think that's a bad idea, but just his presence out there and him putting that production out there. Now, as a defense, you got to drop cards for practice for him, and you got to put a 17 jersey out there to have someone emulate him. You just got to spend time on him, and you got to factor him in. And you already had to do that with Hawkinson. You already got to do that with Cook. You got to do that with Jefferson. So it's just another arrow in the quiver, I think, for O'Connell. And I think what they also need to do is not be afraid to utilize the quick game and the short passes, because these guys are good after the catch, and you can't protect the greatest at all times. Cousins doesn't play well when he's pressured, when he feels pressure. And I think you got to tell Kirk too, 5-step, 7-step drop, take a look. One's not open, two's not open, throw it away. Throw it away. Because we're not great with him running the ball, and we're not great with him sitting in the pocket. He takes a sack and you're behind the chains. I'd rather go for it on 4th and 6, than be looking at a 3rd and 12, So I think that they need to be mindful of that and not make it easy for the other defense either.
So since we kind of talked about KJ a little bit there, one of a guy who works with us over on the Purple Code, go check that out, everybody, if you haven't already. He wants to know, can KJ be the number 2, or is he benefiting being a number 3 guy?
That's a good question. I think he benefits being the number 3. That doesn't mean he can't develop and become a number 2. Because if you never give him the chance to, how do you know if he can do it or not?
Yeah. And last game, it seemed like he was the number 2. And maybe we did start kind of giving him a chance.
Maybe. Yeah. And I think he's worthy of that. I think he's worthy of that. I think Thielen's got value still in the red zone and short areas on 3rd down. So I don't think we'd want to get hung up over who's 2 and who's 3. I think you want to use both Thielen and Osborne.
Yeah, I think I made a point in one of my other videos, and I brought up all the stats of when you combine like Hawkinson and KJ and Thielen, and I made a point that Thielen's like ranked 25th in receptions. I mean, you think number 2 receiver, and you're like, well, if you do the math, he's a number 2 receiver.
Right.
But yards are he's got the same 10 yards per reception as he did last year. He's got relatively the same stats as he had last year, except for touchdowns before he got injured. So I think I agree with you, that he has value, and I think he'll still be with us next year if we can work out the financial side of it.
Comes down to money, baby.
Yeah, TJ Hawkinson just made the Pro Bowl. We found that out. It was kind of like a bunch of good tight ends got hurt this year, so TJ was probably the no-brainer to get in, him and Kittle. But what the point I was making there is that I think we've opened it up at times. This last game and some of these fewer games, and now Thielen, the second half of the season, is actually getting more catches, and it's improving. And I think it was more of us being a little bit conservative, getting our feet wet. And I brought that up earlier in the show. Did you feel like, when our screen game wasn't happening, and our, a couple of games, our pass blocking just wasn't there? Like, I just feel like we've been conservative, worried that we're going to mess up or something on the play calling or the scheme that we've been doing.
Yeah, maybe there might be something to that.
Am I making stuff up?
No, I don't think you are. No, I don't think you are. I think there might be something to that, and I think there's a constant challenge for someone like Kevin O'Connell in his first year, where like almost every button he presses and lever he pulls is the right one. So it's almost like, is this too easy? Like, am I doing, is this too easy? Like, when's the other shoe going to drop type of thing? And so maybe he's guarding against overthinking about that. I'm not really sure, but this is why several times this season I've said, don't apologize for these wins, the way you're scoring points and the way you're winning games. It's who you are. It like play into it, if anything.
Right.
I mean, there's some teams that would die for this fortune and this luck. They haven't had it in years. I don't want to hear any more Vikings fans tell me about how they're cursed after this season. I'm not going to hear it. I mean, I'm not going to hear it.
Complete opposite.
I brought it up to the boys earlier.
Yeah,
Kirk Cousins was interviewed, and with 2 minutes to go in overtime, we get the ball, and we do a simple handoff. Hand it off to Dalvin off the right guard or right. I I think it was off the right guard, and he goes right before that play, they told him, a tie wins the division. So when he handed it off, he's like, okay, he said this and everything. I think, okay, I guess we're going for a tie. And then the play was coming in late. And I'm like, okay, maybe we are. And then it was a drop back, and okay, we're going for it.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like, I think I texted you guys during that game, stop running the ball because we were down so much. But I give him a credit. He has a steady hand. He still tries to, get that run, that run game in there. But geez, with 2 minutes left, we got a ways to go here. Let's throw the ball.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask this question that someone put: is CJ Ham going to have a roster spot next season? I love Hammer time, but is he living up to the fullback role, or does it get phased out in KOC's offense too? I want to say one thing first. Is that in both the Lions and Bills game, there's one common denominator, and that was CJ Ham scored in both those games and won the coin toss to go into overtime.
Colts and Bills games, you mean? You said Lions and Bills, but
Bills and
Colts,
not Lions, Bills and Colts.
Bills and Colts. Yeah.
Did you see? You see the look on CJ Ham's face? I sent you that video. CJ winking, kind of like give him that wink. Like, can you believe this just happened, man?
Hey, Wobby, and tread lightly here, Wobby, because Jamie went to high school with CJ Ham.
I think we brought it up to him before.
Yeah, kind of got a soft spot for him.
You're gonna like it, Jamie, because I think for sure there's a spot for him. I mean, I think you got to be careful if you're gonna say fullback doesn't really fit into our offense. We're not going to have a fullback. Okay, well, that's fine. We won't draft any fullbacks, and we won't prioritize them in undrafted free agency, and we won't sign a free agent one. That's fine. But we already have CJ Ham, who's not just a fullback. He's more than that. And he's one of your 53 best players. If you just rank who are your best football players 1 to 53? CJ Ham's in there.
Number 1. Number 2
well,
I'm kidding.
He's number 1 on Jamie's list. So he's not number 1, but he's not number 54. Okay,
right.
He's somewhere in between there. So I think you'd be remiss to
because he's good on special teams too. So
he is.
It's not just.
I mean, he's a special teams captain, actually. I think.
He is the special teams captain.
And I'm not saying give him a roster spot for life. I'm not saying that. But right now,
slightly.
Right now, I mean, he's one of your best players.
No, for sure.
And I think you want him on the roster, and he helps you win. And I'm just thinking about who the 3rd or 4th running back is and who the 3rd or 4th tight end is. And you're telling me you're going to keep that guy instead, no offense to Johnny Munt, but you're going to keep a 3rd or 4th tight end, but not CJ Ham. I mean, that's just not seeing the forest for the trees.
Yeah. How about the guy he blocks for sometimes? How about Delvin Cook? Is he on the roster next year?
That I think is also a legitimate question. And that's why I love the way they used him in the Colts game in the second half. I mean, they truly used him just like an offensive weapon and not just like a running back. I do not like paying that position in today's NFL. I just don't like it. There's too many good ones coming out. There's too many good ones in free agency. I mean, every year I feel like one of those NFL analysts is telling us how great the free agent running back class is this year. I mean, just rinse, repeat every year. Because smart teams don't pay them. That's why they let him go, because they're just going to draft Alexander Madison. I mean, these guys are coming out all the time, and they're not hard to find right now. So I don't love paying guys that money. Now, the Vikings already did pay him, so when you're in the middle of the season, you got to find a way to use them, and Kevin O'Connell has done that. Does he come back next season? I don't know. I think that comes down to the money and the cap hit. Same thing with Thielen, same thing with Harrison Smith, same thing with Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter. So I think there's a lot of interesting questions with situations like that. CJ Ham is one of them, and Dalvin Cook is one of them. And
the team we're playing this upcoming weekend, that's a big question mark with them too. Speaking of running backs, with them and Saquon Barkley, he's been the motor that's made that team go. So I'm curious to see what they're gonna do, because he's gonna demand a pretty hefty payday, I think.
Yeah, he is. I think he's a special player, just like Dalvin is. And I don't think you can go find CJ. I don't think you can go find Saquon Barkley and Dalvin Cook.
No one can find CJ Ham again.
Okay,
no.
You can't just go find those guys whenever you want. But Alexander Madison, you can win with, and you can go find.
Yep.
I mean, Jerick McKinnon just was a key component for the Chiefs in their win last week. I mean, Jerick McKinnon is one of my guys, and I love him.
That guy.
But I mean, he's been recycled a bunch of times. So it's just not a position I want to pay.
Yeah. You probably paid attention to it over the years because you were inside the facilities. And Daniil Hunter, I think, did this one year where we actually signed him, bought out his contract, gave him guaranteed money for that 1 year, and then worked on the contract later. I mean, that's situations with these vets that we could possibly do. We don't want to pay $14 million to our running back next year and another 14 the next year. I think he's only in for 2 more years. And then there's if we do cut him, we don't lose anything. There's no cap hit, no dead money. So like, could we, if he has $6 million like cap hit and 14 million, saying, hey, I'll give you 10 million. I think that's what we did with, Daniil Hunter. I said, hey, we'll give you this guaranteed money and cut off these years. And then they worked on an extension. I mean, with a running back and the fact that he might get cut and not make any more money, that we could do something that with a vet like that at that position and say, here's some guaranteed money for this year. And if you forego and then you enter into free agency at 28 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like
it's a good solution. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's a good solution.
I think that's a good way to do it. And Dalvin after the season I would think that would appeal to someone like him because he's got to like the way O'Connell utilizes him and tries to factor him in. And I think
he could have a big year, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think O'Connell has a hard time running the ball 25 times in a game, but I don't think he has a hard time running it 15 times and then giving him 6, 7, or 8 targets, in the game. And I think Dalvin would see value in that. So,
because it's with Dalvin, it's definitely, and that's why I think a lot of people get mad when we run him up the middle. When he's in space, he can make things happen. It's just when you just try to pound him up the middle like he's Adrian Peterson. Is
that reverse pitch play is only not worked one time. Otherwise, it's gone for 30 and 40 yards in this play. This last game.
Yeah. Yeah. And Casey, to your point, I mean, the screen pass last week against the Colts out in space. I mean, he was like a slot receiver there, so.
And he's far less likely to get injured because we know he's had a lot of injury history. So like when he's not constantly getting hit hard up the gut by those huge people in the middle, like that's what's going to keep him on the field. And a healthy Delvin is a good Delvin, especially.
And he has not missed a game yet, right? This is a first year.
It's been good for my fantasy team. I had Delvin since the beginning. I had everyone else in my league keeps snagging Madison because they're waiting for Delvin Cook to get hurt, and then I'm screwed. But it hasn't happened this entire season. And
you have a wooden desk. Dave, you have a wooden desk.
Yes, I do.
If you do, you got to knock on it.
Yeah, you must.
Yeah,
there you go.
I was gonna say,
I don't know how legitimate wood this is. It's
doesn't matter.
It counts.
Wood-ish.
We'll just count it. All right, so let's jump into some score predictions for this Giants game here. We'll start with Wobby.
All right, I have 27-13 for this game. I love the matchup. Almost all the way around. The only thing I don't like is the interior offensive line against the defensive front. Other than that, I like or love every personnel grouping and personnel matchup. So I also think that the two sort of like second level predictions I would have are, I think it will be tough sledding early, like a slugfest early and grindy and all of that. And then the Vikings emerge and score a lot of points.
Okay.
So I think that's going to be one of the factors, is just like survive early on and feel it out and then make them guard you, make them cover you. So I think it opens up in the second half. The other thing I'll say is, and we already talked about it, is just the whole Jones and Barkley yin yang thing is concerning. I hope they spend a lot of time this week on that. Like the receivers don't scare me. The tight end doesn't scare me. The O-line's okay, but it's a lot of instincts and a lot of reading.
Daniel Jones doesn't scare me.
No, he doesn't, not as a thrower, but he's got mobility. I think he's a smart guy, and Barkley is a special player. So if you get up by 10 and 12 or 14, you really take that out of their hands. So I like, 27-13, it sounds like to me. And it might be one of those where you kind of feeling like you're resting easy in the fourth quarter.
Let's get it. We haven't seen a lot of those this year. So I'm ready for one.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, since you kind of mentioned some stuff about their team there, like that's one of the reasons why I got to give a shout out to Brian Daboll and the job he's doing over there. Because that team, they started out hot. They've had a ton of it. Like countless injuries. It's almost crazy how many injuries they've had on that team, and yet he's keeping them 8-5-1 in playoff contention. Just ton of credit to that team. But yes, I think eventually those injuries are going to come back to bite them, and I think this will be the first time we see it. I still I don't know. I want to say we're going to blow them out. I like your score prediction, but I'm going to go 27-21 just because we just
brought it back to single digits, Jamie.
Yep. We just don't win by multiple scores. So I'm going to stick with 27-21.
Yeah.
Like you said, I do think it's going to be one of those, though, where by the end of the fourth quarter, we're not pacing back and forth. We're like, okay, we got this.
I hope so. I'm going to go with, I think it's going to be a slugfest overall. Every single week I try to do the more than double digits, winning by more than double digits all the time, whatever. It hasn't worked out for me, but I'm going to go with 35-27. So I think it's going to be really high scoring. Maybe right from the get-go. Hopefully the Vikings just go. I think they're going to come out and score a lot early, and it'll just be up to the Giants to keep up. And that's my prediction. So
okay.
I'm going 34-19. I think this is the game.
Let's go. Times. It is the game. After the momentum from the last game, there's no way we don't come in and do this.
This is the game.
Jamie, I'm glad you mentioned that
8 times already this year.
Jamie, I'm definitely glad you mentioned that, because have we since Wobby's been on, have we talked about the letdown we had after that Bills game with the emotional win in that game? I think this, I'm really hoping that Kevin O'Connell learned from that game, and just you got to get the guys focused, because as we talked about, there's still a ton to play for in this game. You're playing for seeding. You need that number 2 seed at the very least, and the only way to do that, the only way to rightfully do that, is just to take care of your own business and win out. And I think, after that Bills game, I think the team was riding a little too high going into that Dallas game. This game they might even be riding even higher after a win like that. So hopefully Kevin O'Connell learned a lesson. I think he will. I think he's going to have these guys back down to earth and ready to go for a Christmas Eve game that's going to be absolutely rocking in your stadium. You do not want to let those fans down. They almost did that in the first half of this last game. They rightfully, I tweeted it too, I thought they rightfully deserved to be booed that last game. I don't blame the fans at all for that, but the fact they came back and fought, they don't want that scenario to happen again in that stadium. So I think they're going to come out fired up, ready to play, and I think it's going to be a good one.
All right.
Agreed. All right, let's end this thing.
Yeah. Well, Wobby, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your time.
You bet.
Hopefully we all get to celebrate our Christmas with a nice Vikings W.
I hope so too. I appreciate you guys having me on. It's fun to do it. My apologies for being late, but I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. We got long playoffs happening.
Yeah, that's right. We do. All right.
And we, honestly, in the off season, like the week before the draft, I would be awesome to hear your input.
Yeah, let's do that.
During that
some draft
part of
shows for sure.
During the off season, that one, get you on there to talk about the draft would be awesome.
I'm interested. Let's do it. Count me in.
Right.
Awesome.
All right. Sounds good. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate everybody who commented and joined along. And Skol Vikes. Merry Christmas.
Let's go.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.
34-19. Book it.